chapter B. So you can drop your name if you're watching. You can drop your name there to say you are here. But I'm going to start immediately and talk about what is happening in chapter B of the PAM document. Okay. So let's hop into that straight away so that we don't waste each other's time. There we are, chapter B. And like I said, we are unpacking the PAM 2022. I just need to explain that I'm not going to focus on all the information in chapter B. So my focus will be on appointments, on the post structure, on transfers that happen because of operational requirements when things change at the school. And then, of course, I'll talk about salary and qualification related matters, and that I'll also touch on salary levels that you can expect with promotion posts. Okay, so I won't be touching on the advertising and the filling of posts because that also falls under chapter B, but I think that should be an episode on its own. Okay, so that is what I'm going to concentrate on. Hi to that amazing person who sent us a thumbs up. So let's just move on. So the first part, like I said, is the post structure, right? So we're just looking at what kind of posts we can expect at the school and what are the requirements, and then of course also look at the posts that you have at your education district offices, because there are educators who are employed as office-based educators. So I try to just summarize all that information here, but if, of course, if you want the detail, you must go to the PAM 2022 document. Okay, so this is just a nice sort of summary for you, an overview. Okay, now you'll see there I did indicate that you need to have a minimum qualification. You must have an REQV of at least 13, and then of course there are educators who are on 14, and you'll find with your office-based educators they may even have an REQV of 15. Well, you may find that at school as well, but you must have a minimum REQV of 13, which means you should have a matric, a grade 12 certificate, then at least 3 years tertiary qualification that must include a professional qualification as an educator. Okay, and there I put it there, right on top there. And then of course you can see that I also indicated you must be registered with the Educational Council SACE. You must be registered with that council if you want to teach in our South African schools, in our public schools. Okay, so let me just run through the post structure that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, but this is very nice information, even if not an SMT member, but you're just entering the teaching profession or you're interested in seeing what's happening there, then you know what the post structure is. So we have, first of all, the classroom teacher. Now you get three types of classroom teachers. You get the general classroom teacher, and you can see you also have a senior teacher and a master teacher, right? So the PAM explains very clearly what your functional competencies and skills set must be when you want to enter teaching besides having the qualification. So you can see with a classroom teacher, just the general classroom teacher, you just need a basic knowledge of the subject that you're teaching or the phase in which you're teaching according to your qualification. Remember, if you qualified as a foundation phase teacher, you may only teach in the foundation phase. If you're qualified as an intermediate teacher or a senior teacher or EPT teacher, then you now have to teach in that specific phase. Okay? Now that's important because I know of a case where an educator she was qualified as an intersen teacher, and she was placed in the foundation phase. And then when she wanted to apply for the promotion post in the intersen phase, she wasn't considered. No, sorry. She wanted to apply for the HOD, the departmental head post in the foundation phase, and then it wasn't approved, right? And she couldn't understand. So I think that was a very big mistake that was made by the school to put an intersen qualified teacher in the foundation phase, especially given the fact that we've got new regulation concerning that. You must teach in the phase or the grade in which you have qualified. So I'm just throwing it in there. You can see that generic competencies that you need. You have to follow the generic job description that you will find in the PAM, and I think I covered that in episode 1. And then, of course, you are usually placed on a 12-month probation. Okay. Now, the classroom teacher, general classroom teacher, you'll be teaching a couple of years. So if you teach for a number of years, you could then be appointed as a senior teacher, right? So it takes quite a few years, and you need to reach, if you look at the last column there, I say you need to be on notch 103, and you need to have been given a good performance appraisal, right? So once you reach notch 103, and you are you also have a good appraisal for your QMS, then you can be sort of you can be promoted to senior teacher. So you'll still be post level 1, you'll still be a classroom teacher, but based on your experience and the fact that you've reached that salary notch, you will then be given the title senior teacher. Notice the senior teacher, the basic functional competencies that you need is that you must be experienced. You must have a very good knowledge of the subject. And if you look at your job description, then you'll see that the senior teachers can be appointed as grade heads and subject heads, and they are there to support the departmental head. That is critical because at many schools, teachers are senior teachers and master teachers, and then they don't realize that they actually, according to the job descriptions, they can be requested to fill the role as graded and subject head, and then they will report to the departmental head. Okay, so that's a senior teacher. Once you reach notch 103, you will then, if you're on that notch for at least 12 months, you will then be given the status senior teacher. Okay, then in the classroom teacher category, we also have the master teacher. When you become a master teacher, once you're a senior teacher, and you move up to notch 120, salary notch 120, then if you're a year on that notch, you can then be converted to a master teacher, right? And again, like I said, the senior and master teachers are the experienced teachers. They are there to support the departmental head. Just double check your job description. And they are also expected to mentor and coach our new colleagues, our newer colleagues, our younger teachers, our less experienced teachers, or even teachers that are struggling, right? So, yes, many a time schools will assign a mentor or a coach to you, but according to the job description of the senior and master teachers, their job description requires them to play the role of mentor and coach. So let's move on to the next category of educators. You have the school managers, your SMTs, right? So we're very familiar with this. If you're in education, you have the departmental head on post level 2. Your competencies and skills, notice you are required to have an advanced knowledge of the subject or the phase as per your professional qualification. Of course, your job description applies, and then you must teach at least 3 years before you can apply to become a departmental head. If you want to become a deputy principal, that is post level 3, you need an advanced knowledge of the subject again. So there's a heavy emphasis on curriculum knowledge, on learning and teaching knowledge. And then you'll see if you want to qualify for one of those deputy principal promotion posts, then you should have 5 years of actual classroom teaching under the belt. Then, of course, if you want to become a principal, principal's post is post level 4. There, the PAM just says you must have a good knowledge of teaching, which I found very, very interesting, that you must just have a good knowledge of teaching. And then, of course, there is a job description. And if you want to apply for the principal's post, you should have at least 7 years experience in the educational field. Notice the language in the PAM. And so this is my interpretation. And of course, you need to just double check with your union members and other people, when you unpack the PAM. But when you say 7 years experience in the educational field, then I would just, well, my understanding is that that applies to classroom teaching and, of course, being in a leadership and management position where you have gained additional experience on how to manage and lead in an educational setup. Okay, so it's not only classroom teaching that you need, you actually have to display, according to the PAM and my interpretation, you should be able to show that you have experience in the educational field. In other words, beyond just being a classroom teacher. So I would imagine that would also refer to all the management and leadership portfolios that your senior managers have, that you have that knowledge as well when you apply to become a principal. So those are all the posts that you have at a school, right? And then of course we move to office-based educators. Now this is interesting. So you have four posts there at the office for office-based educators. The first one is the education specialist. You need to be on post level 2, and those I'm moving to the next category, and it says functional competencies and skills. Notice those competencies and skills are the same throughout, right up to post level 6, which is your circuit manager, right? So if you want to become an education specialist and be office-based, then you need to be a leader, a communicator, financial planner, strategic planner. You must be a policy developer, and you must be a researcher, and of course you must be a curriculum developer. You must also be a staff developer or staff organizer. Those are all the functional competencies that you need. And I think that's very important because one has to look at whether people have those skills when they come in, because the office-based educators are the ones that support your schools, and so that level of skill is required. Then, of course, there is a specific job description for those office-based educators, and you can see the experience that is required. Again, for the educational specialist, you just need 3 years, and you'll notice for the office-based post that the phrase that is used there, the language that is used there, says experience in the educational field. It's the same language that is used for the principal's post. Okay? Um, the senior education specialist, that is usually your curriculum advisors, your subject advisors. They are known as senior education specialists, and so they also need those functional competencies, and they have a specific, they have a generic job description, which of course will be tailored. And if you want to become a senior education specialist, then you need to have at least 5 years of experience in the education field, right? The senior education specialist is on the same salary level as your deputy principal at a school. And I've already mentioned that the education specialist is the one that has the same salary structure as your departmental head. Then, of course, you get the deputy chief education specialist, that is post level 5. Um, your deputy chief education specialist would be like your head of curriculum, your for FET. So FET will have a head of curriculum, and that curriculum will be on that post level. Post level 5, you'll have a curriculum head in charge of the general educational and training phase, and that person will be on post level 5. Right? Then, of course, you get other deputy chief education posts. Like I was a deputy chief education specialist, and I moved from the IMG manager post, and then eventually became the people management head. So that was a deputy chief education specialist post. Okay, many times the language, the naming, the nomenclature, if one can use that word, the naming would have these general common terms, so you would just know somebody as the curriculum head, but technically, if you look at the post level, then they have these titles, right? Then, of course, you get your chief education specialist. That would be on post level 6, and you can see, okay, before I give the years, the chief education specialist, like your circuit managers, your heads of components. So your management and governance head will be a chief education specialist. That person will be on post level 6. the person in charge of the SLES, the special learning, educational needs component or department at the district office will be a post level 6. So the rank is chief education specialist, and then of course they will have the general naming applied, like one would be called a circuit manager because that person will be in charge of schools. The other one will be the head of SLES, but they all have the same rank. Okay, I missed out on the years here. So a senior education specialist is 5 years. If you want to become a subject advisor, you need at least 5 years. So that means you need classroom experience. And my interpretation is in terms of experience in the educational field would probably mean that you need to have experience as a manager and leader, right, in school business, school organization. Then, of course, if you want to become a deputy chief education specialist, then you need 8 years of experience. And if you want to be, be apply for chief education specialist, then you need 9 years experience in education. So you'll notice there's no post level 4 in the office based educators because post level 4 is the principal, and then you have the deputy chief and then the chief education specialist. Okay. Um, right. So those are the post structures. So you have the four at school, and then you have the four at the district office. Of course, there are numerous other posts at the district office, but those posts are public sector posts, right? And that is not the scope that we're covering here because the PAM only covers educator staff. Right. Let me jump into this one, transfers, right? When the PAM speaks about transfers in terms of operational requirements, that means that you have educators, as you have a staff establishment. In other words, you were allocated a number of educators to be on your staff, right? Which we call a staff establishment. And sometimes those staff establishments will change because your staff establishment is dependent on your learner enrollment. Okay, so when can transfers take place? Let's just look at when can transfers of educators take place. um, Transfers can be applicable when there's a change in learner enrollment, which I just explained. So if you're losing a number of learners during the year and over a 2 year period, I'm speaking under correction, say in a 2 year period, your numbers drop all the time. That means that there's your teachers are now the teachers allocated to your school, um, the number of teachers allocated to your school is far more than you actually require for your learner numbers. Okay, so when we speak about staff establishment, we're actually talking about the number of teachers allocated to your school based on your learner enrollment. Okay, so if there's a change, there is a possibility that you will have teachers in excess, those teachers that or in addition to your staff establishment. But just bear in mind that this transfer process is a legal process and there are many other processes that must take place. We're just looking at basically when can transfers take place when there are changes in your operational requirements, when you have fewer learners, when you have more learners, and so forth. Okay. So change in enrollment, and especially like I say, there's a drop in enrollment, then teachers can be declared in excess, which means that they are held against your staff establishment, and there's a process that they should then be moved from your school to somewhere else in the system via a very rigid and a very rigid process with a lot of rigor, right? Then, of course, if there are changes in your curriculum offering, let's say your curriculum changes, you used to offer business study at your school, if you're high school, now you no longer offer business studies, right? You can't absorb that teacher, so that teacher will then also be an extra teacher, a teacher in excess, right? Or you could have cases where you have schools merging, so two small schools are merged, and there's also a legal process for that to happen, right? And so when there are mergers, there could be a transfer of educators, or schools could be closed, and then of course again transfer of educators can take place. And then the last legal requirement or the basis that they can use to apply the transfer provision is finances, right? So those are the four reasons that will require you to have, or yeah, will necessitate transfers of educators from one school to another. The common language is when we speak about teachers being in excess, right? So this, according to the PAM, the process of determining whether you still qualify for the number of educators on your staff, that process takes place every 3 years, right? So every 3 years, the system will actually check to see whether your staff establishment is correct. You may need, because your school is growing, so you may need to appoint more teachers, and that is fine, that is wonderful, that's promising. But when your school is shrinking, often teachers will be declared in excess, and that process will be followed, and that teacher will then stay at the school until the teacher can be placed at another school. And of course, there's a whole, like I said, a rigorous legal process that ensures that the teacher is not unfairly treated during that process, right? Because it is a labor process. Right. Then after transfers, I want to go to um, grading of schools, right? Remember in episode 1, I spoke about that schools can be graded. So when we speak about principals posts are graded principal posts. So you have, for example, like I said, a P1, P2, P3, P4, P5 post. P1 graded principal post is when you have under 3 teachers. Then a P2 graded post means you have between 3 and 12 educators, right? So I did mention in the previous episode that schools can be upgraded or downgraded if there is a change in your learner enrollment. Okay, so what happens if with the upgrading of schools? If the school is going to be regraded, it's going to be upgraded, right? When the regrading takes place, guys, you must remember that regrading can refer to upgrading or downgrading, right? So as soon as the regrading is, when a regrading must take place, that current principal's post is technically now a substantive a vacant post, or a post in excess rather. I'm confusing myself here, right? So the current post, let's say that post is going to be regraded, and that current principal's post becomes a post that is now vacant, because the current incumbent either is going to be upgraded or downgraded. Okay, it may sound confusing, right? Now let's say the post is going to be upgraded. In other words, numbers have grown, more teachers have been employed over 2 years, your staff establishment has grown, and so your school is going to be upgraded. It's going to be regraded, and so in your case, fortunately, it's going to be upgraded, right? Which means that the current post, that principal's post that is there, must fall away, and a new post, the regraded post, should be the post that is on your staff establishment. Okay, so you don't have this old principal's post anymore. You now have a new principal's post, the regraded principal's post. So the principal legally is not occupying that new post, right? So the SGB, according to the PAM, the SGB can make a recommendation to the HOD to have the current principal appointed in that new principal's post at the school. Okay? And if the HOD agrees, if the HOD approves, then the current principal can be appointed in that regraded post. Okay, I hope that makes sense. You can drop questions in the chat if I'm not making myself clear. So the principal's post is effectively, like I say, a vacant substantive post. What is a vacant substantive post? What is a substantive post? A substantive post means it's a post that is on your staff establishment. That post has been allocated legally to your school, right? So when there's a regrading, the current principal's post is effectively a vacant substantive post, the new one that's created. Then, like I said, the HGB may make a recommendation. If the HOD approves, if the SG, the head of education, approves, and then in writing, that will then be given to the principal, and the principal will now occupy the regraded post. Okay? If the post, however, is if there's a downgrade, right? Again, that downgrade, so it means that the current post that exists is now no longer, the post is now downgraded, right? So that post is, downgraded. So in that case, if it's downgraded, it means you've lost students, and therefore your teacher numbers have also dropped. So there's a downgrade of that post. Again, that downgraded post is in fact a new post, a new graded principal's post. So in that case, if there's a downgrade, then the current principal can continue to occupy this new post, the new graded post, right, for about 2 years. And in some cases, according to the PAM, the HOD, the SG can also decide to extend that period. So, but effectively, the person can stay there for 2 years in that post, subject to the HOD's approval of staying longer, because things may change at the school may grow again, and then the post will have to be regraded to the original grading, right? But let's say the post stays downgraded, then the principal, after the 2 years, or if the HOD is not going to extend that period, then the principal has to make a choice. That principal can either agree to be placed in that downgraded post permanently, be appointed permanently in that downgraded post, or the principal may decide to vacate the post and then apply elsewhere for another principal's post. Okay? What I failed to mention in the upgrade, if the post is upgraded, if the principal post is upgraded, right? Let's say the SGB doesn't want to have the current principal appointed in that new post now at their school, then that can also create quite a sticky situation. So the SGB has quite a lot of power. The SGB can decide not to request and make the recommendation that the HOD appoints the current principal in the new post at the school, and then of course in that case the principal has to vacate the post and then apply elsewhere, or the principal must compete, that post must then be advertised, and then the current principal must compete with all other applicants for that particular post if the principal feels that he or she still qualifies. Okay, so I'll just jump back one slide. Then promotion post, this is the last point I think that I'm making here, and that is when you're promoted from say post level 1 to post level 2, then there will be a salary adjustment as well, right? So you will move salary levels, and that is important. And so I just tried to summarize it here. Now let's say a post level 1 teacher becomes a post level 2 teacher, which means you become a departmental head, and you may be at the top of your salary band in post level 1, which means that your salary, current salary, may even just be the minimum salary of post level 2, right? So if you are promoted to a departmental head and you move into that post, you may find that you earning the same salary, but you got a promotion, right? So the PAM makes it very clear, when you are promoted, there must be a salary progression as well. Okay? So you can either, if you're not earning the minimum salary, the minimum notch in that new salary level, then you will start on that level as in your when you are promoted, or you can, if you're really earning that, you can earn a higher salary. Okay, so let's say you already on that minimum salary in the promoted post salary level, then the PAM stipulates there that you must move at least 6 notches in that salary band. Okay, so the idea is that when you are promoted, that you do have a salary progression, and the minimum should be 6 notches. Now remember, a notch is 1.5%, right? So according to the PAM, it says you must move at least 6 salary notches.